Hi everybody, welcome back to the Ơi! This is the third video in my series on dialectical materialism. So if you want to start from the beginning, check for the link to part 1 in the description. Otherwise, let's get started. To summarize what we've learned up to now, dialectical materialism is a system for understanding our world based on material reality. Dialectical materialism is based on material reality. We look at material evidence to make decisions and to analyze everything around us. Dialectical materialism asks us to have a comprehensive view of reality, looking at all available evidence from all available sources, as well as historical view, looking at how things have changed and developed over time to understand how they exist today. We also revealed the 12 dialectical categories, which form 6 dialectical pairs. And now in this video, we will finally finish learning the basics of dialectical materialism by learning the 3 basic rules of materialist dialectics. These rules are quality and quantity, contradiction, and finally, negation of negation. And just in case some of you might be confused, sometimes I use the term dialectical materialism, and sometimes I say materialist dialectics. These terms have slightly different meanings. Dialectical materialism is the name of the ideology, and the way we apply this ideology into real life is called materialist dialectics. That's it, very simple. I know there's a lot of terminology, but don't worry, it's a little difficult at first, but you almost finished learning, and after this, you will really be able to start using this stuff in your life. So let's break down these last few words so you can understand and get to work. So first, let's talk about the rule of quality and quantity. My partner EJ made a video about this basic rule, and I really recommend you to watch it if you want a deep dive into quality and quantity. But for now, let me explain the basics. Rule number 1, quality and quantity. A quantity is a thing that exists, or a number of things that exist together. When enough of these quantities come together, they take on a quality. For example, if you have 1 grain of sand, you wouldn't call it a pile of sand. If you have 2 or 3 grains of sand, you wouldn't call that a pile of sand either. You have to have a lot more grains of sand before the grains come together and form a pile. In this example, each grain of sand is a quantity, and when you have enough quantity of grains of sand, they take on the quality of being a pile of sand. Quality and quantity have a strong relationship between each other and cannot be separated. Certain conditions must be met before quantities achieve the status of a quality. According to Engels, when all the simple quantity changes come to a certain point, there will be changes in quality. So in other words, quantities are the elements that make a quality. And when we add, subtract, or change enough quantities, then the old quality will stop existing and a new quality will form. Think of a human being growing. If you have 1 cell in mother's womb, we just call it a cell. We can add more cells, but we wouldn't call those cells a baby until a certain number of cells come together in a certain way. They are all human cells, so in dialectical materialist terms, they are the same quantities. But they do not have the quality of being a baby until there are enough of them, and the quality of being a baby is achieved. If I draw a blood sample from your arm, all of the blood in that sample will be the same kind of quantities as the cells in your body. But the blood sample quantity of cells will not have the quality of being a human, even though the quantity of cells in your body do have the quality of being a human. Still confused, right? Okay, let's try one more example. If you go to the wilderness and build a house, your house will be a quantity of a house, and it will have the quality of being isolated in the wilderness. If a few more people come and build a few houses near yours, the area will eventually stop having the quality of the wilderness and will start to have the quality of a village or a small town. If more and more people come and build more houses and buildings, eventually the area will have the quality of being a city. The quality of your individual house will still be exactly the same. It will not have changed at all. But because a large amount of house quantities have collected together in one location, the quality of the area changes from the wilderness to village to town to city. Starting to get the idea? Quality is generally pretty stable. Meanwhile, quantity can change a lot. In your human body, billions of cells die and grow every day. The quantity of cells changes rapidly. But the quality of your human body only changes twice, when you are born and when you die. In a city, houses are destroyed and built every month, but the quality of the city changes but more slowly. Now, to make things more complicated, it's not just the amount of quantities that can change the quality of something. Other changes can also change the quality such as speed, temperature, or many other attributes. For example, the temperature of water can change its quality. When the temperature of water becomes high enough, 100 degrees Celsius, the molecules inside the water will move faster and faster, and then the water will turn into steam. Steam now is the new quality of water. Even idea changes can change qualities. For example, Israel used to be an asshole capitalist because his ideas and beliefs all made him believe that capitalism was good. But over time, those ideas changed. Maybe he changed his mind about some things and slowly hated one or two things about capitalism at a time. But eventually, enough of his ideas changed and he became a communist. In other words, enough quantities in Israel's mind changed and his ideology quality changed from loving capitalism to being a communist. So the rule of quantity and quality is this. When enough quantities change, the quality will change. The rule of quantity and quality is one of the most basic rules about the development of everything in this matter world. But remember, not every change in quantity will bring a change in quality. Quality only changes when quantity gets into a certain point, just like water can only be boiled into steam when it gets to 100 degrees Celsius. Understanding this helps us avoid being impatient and try to change quality before having enough quantity. In Vietnam, we made a mistake about quantity and quality. In the 1970s, right after we had just won the war with the USA, we were in too much of a hurry to build a perfect communist society despite our actual material conditions. We did not have stable agriculture. We did not have a strong economy. Our people did not have enough education. Because of the decades of war and centuries of imperialism we suffer from China, France, Japan, and the USA. In other words, we did not have enough quantity of material needs for our people to build a perfect communist society. But we still wanted to force our society to become a communist utopia, and trying to build a perfect communist society when we still had terrible material scarcity caused many problems, which I talk about in my video, Is Vietnam Socialist? So you see, we tried to force the quality of our society from being an imperialized colony to being a perfect communist state when we didn't have the proper quantities of material needs, education, and other attributes. So remember, quality can only be changed by changing quantity. You cannot cause a change that breaks these material laws of reality. If you have a bunch of water and you want ice cubes, you cannot just force the water to become ice cubes through willpower alone. You have to change the quantity of temperature enough that the water freezes and becomes ice. Just like you cannot just wish a society into communism, you have to have the material conditions met to build a communist society. You have to have the right social and physical quantities before you can try to build a stateless and classless society. However, the opposite is also true. We have to avoid being too scared to push for change when we do have enough quantity. For example, in the USA now, I believe that it is time to have a revolution because the situations over there are really terrible and we've had enough people willing to fight for major changes, as we have seen with the Black Lives Matter protests, where millions of people are risking their life for change. But there are still many people who are so scared that they won't dare to push for the changes that need to be made, or even worse, they try to stop other people from fighting for those changes. If we don't take this opportunity, I don't know when there will be a second chance. Being too in a hurry to change when we haven't prepared for it well is obviously not good. But being too scared and hesitant to push for change, even though requirements are met, is also very bad. We, the leftists, have to judge each situation with a clear mind to decide what we're gonna do next to make sure we will have a successful revolution. And this is all about calculating quantity and quality, and changing quantities in order to change qualities. If you don't think society is ready to change, ask yourself why. Which quantities are missing? Is the problem that you don't have enough comrades willing to fight for radical change? If so, then the job is to recruit and educate people to turn them into comrades. Then when you have enough quantity of comrades, you can change the quality of society. Or if you think the problem is you don't have enough quantity of material needs like food and other resources to sustain the revolution, Then you have to collect those resources until the material conditions are finally met to change the quality. And that's why it's important for you to understand the first rule of dialectical materialism: quality and quantity. Okay, the next rule that we are going to talk about is the rule of contradiction. Contradiction are the forces and aspects within something that oppose each other. According to Lenin, we can define briefly that dialectics is the theory about consistency of the opposing aspects. It is the core of dialectics, but it still requires more explanations and development. So in other words, Lenin pointed out that contradictions are complicated, and understanding them is key to understanding the world dialectically. In order to understand something, to really understand it comprehensively and historically, you have got to understand the contradictions within. That's because the contradictions within a thing are the origin of its motion and development. Things evolve and change and are created and destroyed through contradictions. As a simple example, think of two people playing a game. They both want to win, but only player can be the winner. The other must be the loser. So the game that's being played is built on this contradiction. Without this contradiction, there will be no game. Contradictions always eventually end, and when the contradiction ends, we call that negation. In the case of a game, negation will usually end with one player winning and another losing. But not always. Maybe the game will end early with no winner or loser. That's still a negation, since the contradiction stops being a contradiction and the opposing forces no longer oppose each other. Within our world, where things are always changing all the time, contradiction and negation are very important, and it is the motivation of everything's development. For example, when I was 8 years old, I wanted to be a flight attendant. To make my dream come true, I needed to be really good at English. But at the time, I didn't even know what hello meant. My dream of being a flight attendant was contradicted by my ignorance about English. To solve that contradiction, my mom decided to send me to a new school where I could study English at an early age. Since then, I've been trying really hard to learn English, and now I'm speaking English with you. My English skill when I was 8 contradicted my dream, and it was the motivation for me to study English harder. It caused fundamental changes in who I am and changed my life considerably. By the way, let me tell you the rest of the story. When I was about 19, I found out that you have to be at least 5'3" to become a flight attendant. I am a little bit less than 5'2". That was another contradiction. But this contradiction couldn't be negated in my favor, so I was forced to give up on that dream and focused on a different one. And here I am today, a YouTuber. Again, contradictions and negations push my life forward from where I was and who I was to where I am and who I am. So you can see that there are always contradictions in everything and all our lives. No matter how they are negated, they are always the motivation of our development. Even right now, I'm facing a contradiction. As I've said in many of my videos, I just want to make fun videos like cooking videos or traveling vlogs, but the world is becoming a really scary place and I feel like I need to do something about it. That is why I'm making videos like this, where I talk about boring theory and receive shitty comments from reactionaries every day. But I believe that it's my responsibility to raise my voice to help other leftists in the world. Those shitty comments from terrible people will never stop me from what I'm doing because I know that I'm doing the right thing. This contradiction makes me a stronger person. And I know that together, we can overcome and negate those shitty reactionaries in the comments and in that big scary world to build a better world. Recognizing the roles of contradictions in every situation and condition is very important in real life. It can help us see the real problems, then find the right solutions to solve them. And remember, we have to negate the contradictions to move forward, not compromise. This is a mistake that is very, very easy to make. In my earlier example about the game, you can quit at any time, or you can end the game, but you can only win by making the right decisions in the game that bring you to the final negation where you win and they lose. This is the job of a revolutionary, to look at all the contradictions in the world and figure out which need to be negated to reach the outcome of a successful revolution. Of course, you can just quit. You can walk away and stop playing, but then the contradictions and negations go beyond your control and you will have no effect on who wins and who loses, which can have terrible results for other people, which is why we must fight and do what we can to negate the contradictions so that we win. Okay, now we understand the rule of contradiction, so let's move to the last one, negation of negation. So as we said earlier, a negation is the outcome of a contradiction. In Marxism, negation means the replacement of an old thing by a new thing in the course of its own development. We also have to understand that this negation is itself the result of some previous negation, which was the result of some previous negation, and so on, going back to the beginning of time. In other words, nothing just comes from nothing, at least not in the world we inhabit today. There's no such thing as totally brand new contradiction that came from absolutely nowhere. Every new contradiction is the result of the negation of some previous contradiction. Everything in this world must go through a process of being born, existing, developing, and then perishing. A new thing will always take place with the old one. As we know, energy and matter can never be created or destroyed. It is always being reformed, reshaped, recycled into something new. Within dialectical materialism, that replacement is called negation. Negation is essential for the development of everything. For example, farmers used to do everything through human muscle, until horses negated a lot of that human muscle labor. Then later, tractors negated the use of horses. These negations were the results of struggles between opposing forces. When tractors were first invented, not many farmers used them. They were complicated, they broke down a lot, they were expensive, and farmers couldn't breed two tractors together to make baby tractors. But as tractors improved and became more reliable and more normal, farmers started to use them more and more, until now, where most farmers don't use horses at all for farming. But sometimes dialectical negation occurs within a single thing. For example, when I put a seed in wet soil, it would turn into a sapling, then a tree. The tree is now the dialectical negation of that seed. The tree is in a higher development compared to the seed. When a chicken hatches from an egg, the chicken is the dialectical negation of the egg, and it has a higher form of existence. Because of that complexity, the process of dialectical negation is not a straight line. It actually looks like a spiral. As you can see from this picture, new species evolved based on old species, and it keeps happening and happening until this day, where humans exist, and it will continue developing into the future, assuming we don't negate all lives into extinction. We have to accept that every single thing will eventually be replaced by something new through this process of negation. Nothing is static forever. Everything is always changing, which means contradictions are always playing out into negations. But we must also understand that these changes, these negations don't just appear completely from thin air. Every new negation is based on some prior existence. Now, ideally, human society will progress in a straight line towards better and better forms. In other words, we hope that things will always improve for our society and life will always get better for human beings on Earth. Unfortunately, this is not the case at all. But it's our job as revolutionaries to use our understanding of dialectical materialism to force changes that will improve conditions for human beings as much as we can. Understanding this, there are two situations we need to work very hard to avoid: forgetting past negations and refusing to acknowledge present contradictions. For example, there are now many people around the world who are forgetting the horrible conflicts we have had with fascism in the 20th century. People are forgetting the wars that we fought against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan and all the other fascist regimes that caused so much destruction to millions and millions of human lives. This is causing many people today become fascists and Nazis, forcing us to go through the same kinds of contradictive struggles all over again. There are so many people who refuse to acknowledge that fascism is becoming a real threat to freedom once again. They are refusing to recognize the contradictions that are happening right now, making it much harder for the rest of us to oppose these modern-day fascists, making it harder for us to negate these newer forms of fascism. This is extremely dangerous. And we, as leftists, as revolutionists, have to work together to help people remember these contradictions from the past and to recognize the contradictions we are having now so that we can once again negate the horrible ideology of fascism, hopefully forever. Honestly, it is very sad that we didn't completely utterly negate fascism back in the 20th century when it first rose up. We didn't do a good enough job negating fascism then, so now we are having to deal with it again when we have plenty of other problems to deal with. This failure of past revolutionaries to completely negate fascism then makes it more difficult for us now, and if we don't work to completely negate fascism now, then it will be even worse for future generations. Our responsibility to future human beings is to try to negate terrible things like fascism now so that human society can progress forward without these kinds of problems. So now you know all the basics of dialectical materialism and you can begin applying this knowledge in your life. Moving forward in this series, I will show you how we can use all these tools to analyze situations to solve problems. But right now, I think you can go ahead and start using materialist dialectics in your life. Start looking for contradictions. Start thinking about how to negate contradictions. Start thinking about how quantities shape qualities. And start analyzing things using all dialectical category pairs we talked about in our last video. Remember, it's easy to make mistakes, so maybe find some comrades to study dialectical materialism with. Read literature from Marxist-Leninists like Marx, Engels, Lenin, Ho Chi Minh, Che Guevara, and so on. See how they used dialectical materialism to study problems they faced in their times. There's a lot to learn and discover, but the more you get used to thinking dialectically, the quicker you'll be able to find real material solutions for the problem we face as revolutionaries. I hope that through this series of videos that I'm making, I can contribute in some way to that process. I hope this knowledge will be of some use to my comrades who are doing the real fight out there. Best wishes for you. I hope you know that I'm always with you. And so, if you've come this far and watched the first 3 videos in this series and understand everything we've discussed, congratulations! You just passed the Marxism exam for our first year students. Before ending the video, let's summarize what we've learned about dialectical materialism. Actually, Vietnamese students remember the basics of dialectical materialism through the numbers 2, 6, and 3. 2 main principles: comprehensive viewpoint and historical viewpoint. 6 pairs of categories: private and common, reason and result, obviousness and randomness, content and form, essence and phenomenon, and the last pair, possibility and reality. 3 basic rules of materialist dialectics: rule of quality and quantity, rule of contradictions, and rule of negations of negations. Remember these 3 numbers and you are well on your way to mastering dialectical materialism. Use this knowledge to help us build a successful socialist revolution. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please subscribe and maybe consider being my patron. See you next week. Bye-bye.